It began not with a cannon, not with a bomb, not even with the marching of armies. It began with a whisper. A single line hidden deep within a secret telegram, and yet it carried the weight of chains heavy enough to bind an entire continent. A demand, a threat, a deadline of 48 hours. And at the bottom of that telegram, a name the whole world knew: Donald J. Trump. Brothers and sisters, I ask you to lean in. For this is not just the tale of one man in Burkina Faso. It is the echo of generations. It is the story of a people who have been told again and again, you must give, you must kneel, you must surrender. But on this day, a soldier stood up. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, with the weight of a nation on his shoulders, faced the empire without trembling. Stay with me now, for this journey is not light. It is fire, it is blood, it is gold, and it is hope. And before we walk further, I invite you, subscribe not just to this channel, but subscribe to courage, subscribe to truth, subscribe to the freedom of Africa's voice. It began with silence, the kind of silence that makes a man's heart heavy. Deep inside the guarded halls of power, where cables cross oceans and secrets pass from one hand to another, a single telegram was written. It was not long. It was not flowery. But it was sharp, cold, and merciless. Buried in its lines was a demand that would chill any nation, let alone a land still healing from years of hunger, war, and betrayal. Burkina Faso, a country of courage but also of scars, was told it had 48 hours to decide its fate. 48 hours to hand over 70% of its newly mined gold, or to pay in full a debt of 5.6 billion United States dollars plus interest. And the signature at the bottom? Not a faceless bureaucrat, not an anonymous committee, but the most familiar of names, Donald J. Trump. At that moment, still the loudest voice of the G7, still the shadow that towered over the International Monetary Fund. Now hear me, friends, this was not diplomacy. No, this was extortion dressed in a suit and tie. The message was carried by trusted intermediaries, delivered by dawn into the hands of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young soldier who had risen from the dust of Ouagadougou to lead his people. It came stamped with red ink, underlined with arrogance. The words were as hard as steel. We fed you when you were starving. We lent you money. We protected you. Now you will pay or you will suffer. But the West miscalculated. They believed they were speaking to a pawn, not to a leader. They thought they were addressing a trembling government, not a soldier forged in fire. Captain Traoré read the cable twice. Not once did his hand shake. Not once did his eyes wander. He summoned his generals, his ministers, and his mining executives, and in that chamber, heavy with the weight of history, he said what many had longed to hear for generations. Tell the G7 and the IMF, Burkina Faso is not for sale. And word began to spread, faster than the desert wind. From Lagos to Kinshasa, from Bamako to Dar es Salaam, headlines rang, "The West demands Africa's gold." Burkina Faso given an ultimatum, Traoré stands firm. But beneath the soil, beneath the red earth scorched by the Sahel sun, another truth was waiting to be revealed. For months, a covert geological task force had been at work, confirming what whispers had only guessed. Colossal reserves of gold, sealed away, encrypted with foreign technology, hidden from Western eyes. The satellites of America began to notice. Strange signatures of energy. Equipment arriving quietly from Iran, from Venezuela. Convoys moving under cover of night. And the screens in Washington began to glow with one terrible truth. Burkina Faso had taken back its mines. The contracts once held by French and American corporations were gone. In their place, soldiers guarded the shafts, the convoys, and the fields. No longer did the wealth of the land flow to Paris. No longer did it disappear into Wall Street. It was redirected home, to a development fund, to a people who had known only crumbs. and in the boardrooms of the G7, in the marble offices of the IMF, panic began to grow. For here was not just gold. Here was a blueprint. Here was an African nation standing up, saying no, and showing the world it could survive without bowing. And so the message from Trump was not just about dollars or ounces of gold. It was about crushing the very idea of defiance before it could spread. If Burkina Faso could resist, why not Mali? Why not Niger? Why not Chad? Why not Congo? The cable was not only about debt. It was a weapon aimed at the heart of sovereignty itself. But Captain Traoré was not trembling. He was steady. He was calm. And when he rose from his chair, after reading that telegram, he did not bow his head. He lifted it. He looked his people in the eye and he declared, "They want 70% of our gold. They will get 100% of our resistance." And the stage was set. The empire had made its move. The soldier had answered. Now the question hung heavy over Africa and the world. Would he surrender the gold, or would he resist the empire? The morning sun rose over Ouagadougou, but the air was heavy, thick with expectation. The radios were silent. Televisions flickered. Streets were hushed. A nation was holding its breath. For word had spread that the captain himself, Ibrahim Traoré, would speak. When the screen came alive, there was no fanfare, no grand hall, no banners, no gilded backdrop, just a soldier standing straight in his uniform, one hand resting upon the Burkina Faso flag, the other gripping a folder stamped with the seal of his nation. The telegram lay inside, sharp as a blade, poisonous as venom. And then he began to speak. To the people of Burkina Faso, to our brothers and sisters across Africa, hear me. His voice was steady, not trembling, not unsure, but sharp, clear, and heavy with truth. They are not only demanding our debt. They are not only demanding 70% of our gold. They are demanding our fear. They seek to buy our silence with threats. They seek to chain our dignity with numbers written in foreign ink. The room went still. His words pierced like arrows. Then came the thunder. To Mr. Trump and his supporters, you have underestimated us. We are not Libya. We are not Iraq. We are not your playground. We are Burkina Faso, and we will never surrender our land. You gave us 2 days. Here is our answer. Now you have 2 days to take your greed, your threats, your arrogance, and leave African soil. He paused, he saluted, and then he walked away. No questions, no compromise, no surrender. And outside, the silence broke. It broke with drums, with shouts, with tears, with chants that rose from rooftops and marketplaces. He said no, he said no, he said no. From Lagos to Dar es Salaam, African newspapers printed the words in bold ink. Africa is not for sale. The youth shared his speech online. The old men nodded in quiet pride. The women sang, carrying food to the soldiers at the mines. But my friends, where there is fire, there is smoke. And in Washington, the smoke turned into flame. Inside the Situation Room, anger spilled like oil on stone. He defied us publicly. He embarrassed us globally. He must be stopped. At CIA headquarters, new orders were written. More drones in the Sahel. More surveillance. More whispers of destabilization. And then came the tweet. Donald J. Trump, furious and unrestrained, in all capital letters. Traoré just made the biggest mistake of his life. Africa will pay for this. The markets trembled. The media howled. CNN flashed its red banners. Burkina Faso risks collapse. Fox News thundered, "This soldier is dangerous." Commentators spat out words, reckless, unstable, Putin's puppet. But in the streets of Ouagadougou, the people only laughed. They replayed the clips, remixed them into songs, and danced to the rhythm of defiance. And on the internet, a single phrase spread faster than the empire's propaganda. If they hate him this much, he must be doing something right. Yet even as the world cheered, darker plans were moving. In boardrooms of oil companies, phones rang with panic. At ExxonMobil, at Halliburton, at the secretive offices of private intelligence firms, strategies were drawn. How to crush this defiance, how to silence this soldier. And in the shadows of the Sahel, men with no flags and no uniforms began to move. Contractors, mercenaries, agents. A storm was gathering, not from outside, but from within. Yes, the speech of Traoré had set a continent on fire, but fires attract wind, and wind can feed or destroy. The cheers of Africa were rising, the wrath of the empire was brewing, and so the question loomed, who would stand with Traoré when the storm finally broke? When a soldier dares to say no to an empire, the earth trembles. But sometimes that tremble does not end in collapse. Sometimes it becomes a roar. In the days that followed Traoré's fiery speech, the world expected silence from Africa. They expected fear. They expected leaders to distance themselves, nations to retreat, allies to vanish. But what they witnessed instead was a procession of brothers stepping forward. From Mali came Colonel Assimi Goïta, calm, steady, a man who had already stared down Western threats in his own land. From Niger came General Abdourahmane Chiani, eyes burning with determination, his voice unyielding. From Guinea came Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, tall, unapologetic, a soldier who refused to bow. They did not come with words of pity. They did not come with cautious diplomacy. They walked into the presidential palace of Burkina Faso, stood side by side with Ibrahim Traoré, and declared before the cameras of the world, "If you touch Burkina Faso, you touch all of us." And with those words, a shield was born. Not NATO, not the United Nations, but Africa's own, the AES shield. A covenant not written on paper but forged in blood, betrayal, and the longing for freedom. Mali sent its seasoned advisors to guard the mines. Niger provided logistics, vehicles, men who knew the desert's harsh terrain like their own skin. Guinea opened its airspace, ready for emergency supply flights. Together, they formed a firewall, a brotherhood saying in one voice, "Africa is not for sale." But Africa was not standing alone. In the east, two giants moved, quietly but with power. China landed not with soldiers, not with drones, but with engineers and diplomats. Their offer was swift, almost unbelievable. A fully operational mining facility within 90 days, a valuation system that bypassed Western banks, and a digital trade platform built on China's own currency. Cutting out the dollar, cutting out the CFA franc, cutting out the chains. For the first time, Burkina Faso could see its gold valued by its own hands, not by foreign masters. Then came Russia. A jet touched down, carrying not only specialists, but crates marked with crimson letters, special defense assets. They were not empty threats. They were anti-drone systems, electronic warfare tools, shields against the eyes in the sky. The message was clear. Burkina Faso's gold would not be taken by force, not while Moscow stood watch. And as the East gave its hand, the people of Africa gave their hearts. In Bamako, the streets thundered with chants. In Conakry, murals appeared of Traoré holding his nation's flag high above the drums of resistance. In Chad and the Central African Republic, youth groups shouted a new slogan, AES or death. On social media, African creators flooded the digital sphere. Videos, songs, remixes, all carrying the same pulse. Our resources, our future, our fight. Even African Americans thousands of miles away found their voices in unison. This man told Trump no, and lived to tell the story. That's leadership. Yet, friends, let us not forget, empires do not sleep. As joy spread across Africa, disinformation spread across Western airwaves. CNN declared Burkina Faso was walking into disaster. The BBC painted Traoré as a reckless gambler. Fox News screamed of Russian puppetry. But in the streets of Ouagadougou, the laughter of the people answered. They replayed the clips. They wore them on T-shirts. They turned insults into anthems. Every smear became fuel for the fire. And in the quiet of the night, Ibrahim Traoré understood the deeper truth. The real enemy was not just Trump, not just the G7. It was the system itself. The system of banks, corporations, and governments that had for generations taken Africa's treasures while leaving its people in chains. And so he chose not to fight alone. He stood within a brotherhood, within a shield, within a dream larger than himself. A dream where gold did not vanish into foreign pockets, but where Africa held the key to its own destiny. But as the shield rose, so too did the stakes. For every ally gained, a new enemy sharpened its blade. For every cheer in Bamako, a whisper of sabotage echoed in Washington. And so, my brothers and sisters, I ask you, if one soldier's defiance could spark a movement, what would happen if a whole continent said no? Would it bring freedom or bring the storm? Tell us what you believe in the comments below. From the marble towers of New York to the oak-paneled rooms of Washington, the verdict on Ibrahim Traoré was swift and severe. To the West, he was no hero. He was a problem. CNN called him reckless. Fox News labeled him a dictator in uniform. The Financial Times warned that investors would flee, that instability would reign. In boardrooms and policy meetings, his name was whispered not with respect, but with contempt. He is dangerous. He must be contained. And the State Department, faced with a leader who refused to kneel, sharpened its language. Burkina Faso risks international isolation. Behind those polished words lay the true threat: sanctions, blockades, destabilization. But step beyond the Atlantic, and the picture was different. In the streets of Bamako, Traoré's face was painted on walls, not as a tyrant, but as a warrior. In Conakry, young men carried his speeches like gospel, repeating his words, "We will not surrender." Across African capitals, his defiance was not seen as madness, it was seen as freedom. And beyond Africa, too, voices began to stir. In Moscow, commentators praised his courage. In Beijing, officials spoke of a new multipolar world, one where small nations no longer had to bow before empires. Even in Latin America, echoes were heard. At last, someone stood against the IMF and lived to tell it. This clash of perspectives was more than politics. It was a prophecy. To the West, Traoré was a warning, proof that their grip on Africa could slip. To Africa, he was a sign, a living testament that sovereignty was not just a word, but a possibility. And as satellites circled above, as warships quietly drew closer to the Gulf of Guinea, one truth became clear. The world was not merely watching Burkina Faso. The world was watching the balance of power shift, inch by inch, heartbeat by heartbeat. The question was no longer simply about gold. It was no longer simply about debt. It was about the very future of the global order. And so we ask, would Africa's bold stand lead to liberation, or would it awaken a storm that the continent could not contain? At dawn, as the Sahel sun broke over the horizon, a new decree was signed into law. It was short, it was sharp, and it was final. All gold reserves within Burkina Faso are hereby nationalized and permanently protected from foreign corporate ownership. Those words were not mere ink on paper. They were a line drawn across history. With a single act, Captain Ibrahim Traoré broke the script that had been written for Africa for generations. No longer would the mines feed Paris. No longer would Wall Street write the contracts. No longer would the IMF hold the keys to Africa's vaults. Foreign corporations were escorted out. G7-backed teams were shown the border, and when the dust settled, the message was clear. Our land is not your bargaining chip. Our gold is not your repayment plan. But the soldier did not stop there. He stepped before his people again, this time not in uniform, but in traditional dress. No medals, no armor, only the fabric of his ancestors wrapped around his shoulders. His voice was calm, his eyes unshaken. "For generations," he said, "we have been exploited. For generations, they have taken what is ours. But I am not here to serve empires. I am here to serve my people. And let it be known across every hill and valley, we are not afraid. We will not negotiate with thieves." And then came the moment that would echo beyond borders, beyond languages, beyond generations. A video, only 43 seconds long, but more powerful than any army. Traoré staring straight into the camera. "This is not just about debt. This is not just about gold. This is about the soul of Africa. And I would rather die standing than live kneeling." Within hours, the clip went viral. 12 million views, 20 million, 40 million. Across Africa, it was played in schools, sung in markets, whispered in churches. Even in the diaspora, in Harlem, in Atlanta, in Kingston, old men and women leaned closer to the screen and nodded slowly. "This is our son. This is our fight." Time magazine called him the man the West can't bully. African creators filled YouTube with his speeches, turning them into anthems of sovereignty. A leader had become a symbol. A soldier had become a movement. But let us not be naive, brothers and sisters. Symbols inspire, but they also provoke. Already whispers spread of sabotage. Already foreign powers circled closer, plotting, scheming, waiting, for the captain has taken one bold step. But every step forward makes the path more dangerous. Every act of defiance makes the enemy more desperate. And so we are left with a question that hangs over Africa's tomorrow. Is this the dawn of true freedom, or the calm before another storm? Brothers and sisters, we have walked together through a storm. We have seen the arrogance of empires demanding gold as though it were theirs. We have felt the sting of insult, the weight of threats, the cold shadow of sanctions. That is the anger, the righteous anger that rises in our souls. We have also remembered the pain, the long centuries of chains, the silent theft of resources, the blood spilled in silence while the world looked away. That is the sorrow, the ache of memory, the grief of a people who have lost too much and too often. But tonight, let us not end with anger. Let us not close with sorrow. Let us rise with hope. For hope is what we saw when one soldier stood against an empire. Hope is what we heard in 43 seconds of fire. This is about the soul of Africa. Hope is what echoed when the streets danced, when the murals rose, when the songs of freedom filled the air. Make no mistake, the road ahead is long. The powers of the world will not give up easily. They will twist the headlines. They will stir the shadows. They will plot against the rising of a free Africa. But they cannot erase the truth now written in the hearts of millions. And so we stand at a threshold. Is this the dawn of liberation or the beginning of another trial? That is the question history will answer. But for us, here and now, we must decide. Will we watch in silence, or will we stand in solidarity? This story is more than Ibrahim Traoré news. It is more than Burkina Faso news. It is the cry of a continent. It is the prayer of generations. It is the fight for dignity, for sovereignty, for tomorrow. So I ask you, what do you believe? Is Africa finally breaking free? Share your thoughts, your hopes, your truth in the comments below. And before you leave, remember this. Subscribe not just for updates, not just for headlines, but subscribe for truth. Subscribe for courage. Subscribe for the hope of a rising Africa. Because as long as we keep telling these stories, as long as we keep the fire alive, no empire can silence us. Yes, my friends, this is more than news. This is a prophecy. And the world is listening.